All right, hi guys. So this week we're talking about visual texture and tactile texture. Now, tactile texture on artwork is something that you can feel. If you went up and touched that piece of artwork, it would feel rough, it would feel soft, it would feel bumpy. If you were to touch it, you can feel something on the surface of your paper. Even if your paint is a little bit lumpy, you could maybe feel that once it's dry on the surface of your paper. Visual texture is something that our eye sees and thinks to itself, oh, I know what that feels like. If I were to draw some grass on my paper, you would look at it and think, oh, I know what grass feels like. Or if I was going to draw a sheep on my piece of paper, you might say, oh, I bet that sheep feels really soft. So you're drawing things, or you're painting, creating things about that subject that implies texture. So if I was going to draw a sheep, I would make its body really fluffy so that it would look like it would be soft in real life. So I've got a couple of different ways to do that on my art this week. And like I said, you could just draw something that you know has a very interesting texture in real life and might remind you of that texture when you draw it. I have some things here that I'm going to dip in some paint, and all of these have a texture, a tactile texture when I feel them, but because I'm using these to stamp or paint on my artwork, you're not going to be able to feel the texture of these items on the paper, but you might be able to see the texture and then guess what it might feel like. So let's start with this really fun comb. And I just have some black paint here. I'm gonna dip the teeth of the comb into that paint, and then I'm going to drag it across the surface of my paper. I might press it down a little bit. Maybe I even want to get a little messy and kind of finger paint on my paper and then drag the comb through that paint. That's way cooler. So you might look at this and say, oh, I bet I know what she used for that, and I bet I can guess what it felt like, because you can kind of see the marks of the teeth in my paint right there. I really like the way that looks. I'm gonna do another one and just finger paint a little bit, get a little bit of paint on my paper, and then I'm just dragging my comb through the paint to make that great texture. Let's try something else now that my fingers are all black and messy. Let's try the edge of this cardboard. You can see it's got a really cool texture right here. So let's see if we can get that texture onto our paper. I'm gonna dip the cardboard in my paint, and then I'm just gonna start stamping. Oop, didn't get enough paint that time. And you can find a bunch of things around your house that maybe your grown-up wouldn't mind if you used to paint with. You could even trace or rub with those objects. So if you find something that has a really cool texture and you don't want to use paint, you could always lay it underneath your paper and then take a crayon on its side and rub over top of it to get that really cool texture. Maybe we'll do that together in a minute as well. The last thing that I have to stamp with is this piece of sponge. So if you have an old kitchen sponge or something that you want to cut up, this has a super great texture and it transfers really well to our paper. So let's try this. Oh, that's an awesome texture. I love that. I'm gonna get a little bit more paint on my sponge, and I'm gonna stamp a little bit over here. It's looking a little empty. And I'm being kind of creative with this piece of artwork because it's not necessarily about what I'm making or what I'm representing with my shapes and textures. Although you could represent something, like if you wanted to draw your backyard with a bunch of different textures, that would be super cool. But for this one, I'm making it a little bit more abstract. I'm making it all about the texture. So when you look at this work of art, it's all about the types of textures that you're seeing or feeling. Now, these are all visual textures. You might be able to feel a little bit of the surface of the paint when it dries, but mostly you're looking at it and you're saying, oh, I bet whatever that was really porous. It had some holes in it. I bet it was maybe squishy. Like maybe she did use a sponge to stamp that. When I'm looking at the marks that my cardboard made, I'm saying, oh, I bet that's kind of a crinkly texture on the inside of whatever she used to stamp. And for the comb, you're saying, I bet there's some teeth that she was using. So you might not guess a comb by looking at this, but you might say, I wonder if she was using a really firm brush to drag through that paint. Now we're going to move on to tactile textures. So you can also add things to the surface of your artwork. Just like I said, that if you walked up to it and felt the artwork, you could feel something on the surface. So the first thing that I have is this really cool piece of glitter paper, and you can hear that when I run my hand over it, it's got kind of like a rough texture. So I think I'm going to cut out kind of an abstract or free-form shape out of this glitter paper, and I'm gonna glue this down onto the surface of my artwork. Now, if you had some glitter at home and your grown-up is okay with you using glitter because it can get a little messy, you could also just use glue and put some glitter on the surface of your paper. So I'm gonna turn this over, I'm gonna add some glue to the back of it, and I'm gonna glue it to the surface of my art. Now, when you feel my art, you're going to feel something with your fingers, and you're going to see the texture that I created with that paint. So I'm doing kind of a mixture of both. And I like that kind of free-form organic shape right there. So I think I'm going to do another one to kind of balance my work of art up in the opposite corner. So I'm gonna do another piece of my really rough glitter paper. And if you wanted to represent the idea of like a rough texture, but you just wanted to draw, what could we do? Well, glitter is kind of made of a bunch of different dots. So if you were going to create a bunch of really tiny dots on your paper, that might imply kind of a rough texture. Okay, so now I've got these two textured items. The last one that I wanted to share with you, and you could glue a variety of things down to your paper that you might be able to feel, like cotton balls, fur. You might glue down some beads that are kind of a bumpy texture. Anything that your grown-up says is okay to glue on your paper to add some texture would be a really fun idea. Tin foil, I'm thinking of all kinds of things. I have some tissue paper right here, and you might say, Mrs. Turner, this is a smooth texture. What is that adding to my work? But watch, when I crumple it up into a little ball and then unfold it, it's got this super awesome crinkly texture that now I'm going to cut out and glue onto my artwork. And with tissue paper, you want to be really careful because if you use too much glue, it just kind of turns into this goopy mess. So I'm going to glue onto the surface of my paper first, and maybe I'll add my tissue paper kind of over here down in this corner. So I'm gluing first onto my, all right, I got interrupted. What I was saying was that I put my glue down onto the surface of my paper. I'm making sure this has got a really cool crinkle texture before I glue it down. I may even rip it at the edge a little bit to fit the area that I want. Making sure it has a really cool crinkle texture, and then I'm just gonna press that down into the glue. And then when this dries, if you rub your hand over this, this feels really like rough and crinkly. This feels kind of bumpy and rough. I could add some soft things. I could add some smooth things. It's up to you this week, but I do want you guys to think, how are you going to represent texture visually? Through maybe the things that you draw. Like I said, you could draw grass and someone would guess how that would feel. Or you can use different kinds of objects and paint to stamp that texture onto your paper. If you are wanting to add tactile texture to your artwork this week, and again, I would love to see you use both kinds of texture in your art this week, find some things that your grown-up says are okay to glue onto your work that might be fun to touch afterwards. So tissue paper, old grocery bags, like I said, glitter. If your grown-up is brave enough to let you use glitter, you could glue down cotton balls. I named a bunch of things for you earlier. So I hope you have fun kind of hunting around your house, seeing what's available to you, and seeing the two different ways that you can add texture, visually and tactilely. I hope you guys have fun. We're so excited to see what you make this week. Bye.